as part of our trial, we were able to depose representatives who were essentially, they weren't just the individuals. They, sitting there in that deposition room, were representing the ADA and the CDC in a human form and under oath. And when we deposed them, the CDC, the FDA, the ADA, the manufacturers of these fluoridation chemicals, the American Academy of Pediatrics, we said, please show us, do you have any safety data on water fluoridation in the developing brain or safety data on fluoride in the developing brain? And not a single one of those individuals were able to provide a single piece of data or study confirming the safety or showing that water fluoridation is safe for the developing brain.
Welcome to Unconventional Medicine. I'm your host, Brendan Gochran, molecular biologist. Joining me today is my esteemed co-host, Dr. Jason. He's a registered clinical pharmacist with 15 plus years in immunology and solid organ transplant expertise. And today we've got a very special guest. Stuart Cooper is the executive director of FAN, which is Fluoride Action Network. And FAN recently won a landmark case in U.S. District Court against the EPA. We're very happy to have him on the show and talk about the importance of this health impact of this decision. Welcome, Stuart, to the program.
Yeah, thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
So pleasure is ours. So there's probably a lot of people who are watching right now who don't even realize, well, number one, they might not even realize that fluoride is being added to their water by the local utility. And then the other piece of this is that there's a risk factor at all. Could you sort of give us an overview of, what it is that you guys do over there and allow the people at home to figure out what this is all about?
Yeah, the Fluoride Action Network is a charitable nonprofit. It was founded in 2000, so we're about to reach our 25th anniversary of our founding. And it was a coalition of medical and scientific professionals, along with environmentalists and concerned parents who wanted to create a science-based organization focused on fluoride toxicity. And that goes into just informing the public about dental products and the fluoride content you'll find in those and the potential toxicity. But primarily over the years, our focus has turned to urging people not to ingest fluoride and water fluoridation. And so water fluoridation is predominantly an American practice. In fact, we're an extreme outlier. This blows a lot of people's minds. You hear from dentists that fluoridation is one of the greatest things since sliced bread. They actually call it one of the greatest public health achievements of the 20th century.
Yeah, I saw that when I Googled this. Yeah.
Yeah, well, we call ending fluoridation will be the greatest public health achievement of the 21st century.
Yeah, actually,
we're bringing us into the future.
It's fascinating that you brought that up, because when I ended up doing some research on this, there's only a handful of countries in the world that fluoridate their water, and a number of countries that have banned it. So I think there's Australia, Ireland, Singapore, Brazil, and the U.S. They're the only ones that fluoridate their water. I don't. Is that accurate?
Yeah, New Zealand and I'm not sure if you said that. New Zealand and Ireland as well. But yeah, no, we're 95% of the world does not fluoridate their drinking water, and that includes 98% of Europe and most industrialized, Japan, most industrialized countries, and they do it for a really specific reason, or they don't do it for a very specific reason. That's because they view it as a violation of medical ethics, meaning the chemical that we put in the water supply, they're silicofluorides, and we can get into those in a minute. But by fluoridation chemicals or additives are the only treatment chemical we add to our public water supply that is intended not to treat the water. It does nothing for safety or potability. It's intended solely to treat the consumer. It's a medical treatment. I mean, I guess we want to be conservative. We can call it a supplement. We put a supplement in our drinking water.
Right.
But its intention is to prevent dental decay, which it doesn't do, which we can also get into. But it's the only chemical we do that with. And if I ask this to folks rhetorically, if you went into your city council and you said, hey, I really think we should add lithium to our drinking water to reduce depression. I really think we should add statins to reduce,
cholesterol. Right.
They would laugh you out of the room. They'd be like, who is this quack? We're not going to put it. We want pure drinking water.
Yeah.
Essential for life. But this is what the public health world, the dental industry did in the 40s, and they were successful. When we were talking about a time in the 40s where things were lead laden, and I think they were still practicing lobotomies. So that's the sort of practice. It's been going on for 80 years, and the science was never there. It was never established showing efficacy. It was very weak originally, and there was no science on safety. So it's catching up to them.
Go back, if we can, to 1945 when there was this, what I would call relatively arbitrary decision to put fluoride in the water on the premise of dental health, right? Is that fair to say?
Yes, there were some that believed that it could be beneficial. Yep.
You have history and knowledge in this folklore, right? And so what was the thought process over the decades? We just accepted this as Americans, and because I remember, I was born in 1970, and I remember hearing about it, and my parents went along with it, and no one was really fighting anything. Is that the way it's been from 1940 until now, or were there other uprisings that occurred along the way that says, hey, this may not be good?
Oh, there were absolutely uprisings along the way, and there were trials in court. Early on, the 50s and 60s, that's when this really expanded. And a lot of the communities, your listeners probably live in communities that haven't revisited this subject since the 60s. But there were scientists and doctors opposing it at the time. Unfortunately, the way we learned, PR works and media works, the dental industry was able to just ridicule opposition and say, "Oh, they're John Birch Society. They're telling you it's going to destroy, it's a brain thought control experiment by communists." And that wasn't. Scientists weren't making those claims. These were just claims, I think, created to ridicule those scientists and doctors, including, I believe, over 10 Nobel Science winners in medicine or science who oppose water fluoridation. It was a way to stifle debate, and it was effective. Right. But originally, the way this started was a dentist took interest in citizens who lived in the Rockies, who had the Rockies in the United States, the mountainous region in Colorado, and they had Colorado brown staining of the teeth, which was dental fluorosis. And I definitely want to touch base on that a little bit further in what's happening in modern times with dental fluorosis. And he said, what is this brown stain, and why do some of these individuals have less dental decay? And it was a really crude kind of just observational experiment going from town to town. And he observed that there was some higher levels of fluoride in the people's water that had the brown staining. Now, this is calcium fluoride, so there are higher levels of calcium too. Calcium fluoride isn't good for you because it still has fluoride, which is bad for you. But calcium is important for teeth, right? So it probably impacted the dental decay rates more than the fluoride did. And so it was a misunderstanding. It was at that time, he concluded that looking at some of these communities, the ones that had around 1 part per million fluoride in the water still had fluorosis, but it wasn't as bad as those with higher levels. And so that's where this idea of around 1 part per million, 80-year-old idea, just an observation from a dentist in the 1940s or earlier in Colorado, that's where your optimal level originally came from. Sounds ridiculous. But that was, unfortunately, there was no science to look into the safety of it. And there were studies looking into the effectiveness of it. That's where the focus was. And the focus was there because you had an aluminum smelting industry led by Alcoa, a major, major corporation. This is how it all starts, right? With money and corporations back in the 40s. And many of their employees were exposed to high levels of fluoride in the aluminum smelting process. And they were having severe side effects. They were suing Alcoa. And so Alcoa was funding studies looking into the potential benefits of fluoride so that they could counter some of these health effect lawsuits. And that's why at the beginning, there was this glut of really poor quality studies on efficacy and nothing on side effects, right? And so then that got into the dental world. I'm sure the dental industry probably received some funding based on this, but it became now this wonder drug, this wonder mineral, and where no studies were looking at the effects other than potential efficacy. And those studies were corrupt. So that's what happened. People did push back, but there was ridicule. And even even today, I'll still read, we could Google today and find 10 articles written on the subject, and many of them will mention the John Birch Society and tinfoil hats and conspiracy theorists.
Yes.
And that's all it is. It's meant to stifle debate.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the American Dental Association adopted fluoride because I'm assuming at the time they felt that it was beneficial for dental health and limiting or preventing dental caries. Do they still hold that same belief as strongly as they did, let's say, in 1970 and 1980? Or do you find that they're kind of coming off of that thought process?
So we need to separate your average dentist from the American Dental Society. The American Dental Society is a lobbying organization. They look after their members, members' credibility and reputation, and their profits. That's it. They shouldn't be a trusted public health organization. It's a lobbying organization. The average dentist I talk to them. I go try to make friends with them at every city council meeting I go to. They learned in dental school this benefits the teeth. They work with topical fluoride products every day in their office. They see a benefit to topical. And they're handed talking points from people that they trust, from the American Dental Society and the CDC. They haven't looked into the subject themselves, but there's nothing nefarious going on from their perspective. The American Dental Society Association, at this point, they're just zealots. They will be the last ones on earth to admit that they have harmed people for 75 years. And in fact, they just put out a statement after our federal ruling saying they've seen no credible science or reason to change their position on water fluoridation whatsoever. They're not even pausing. They're not even considering. Now, to the average layperson, this seems like, oh, well, maybe they have a point. But I've been doing this for 15 years. Many studies have come out. That we just published, or NIH, or what I should say is the 10th consecutive NIH-funded study looking at neurotoxicity and fluoride was published. All 10 have found neurotoxicity. Every single time one was published since 2012, the ADA has put out a press release saying, we stand by water fluoridation. They're going to keep doing that no matter what. So at this point, they're just zealots, and they still believe it has a beneficial effect. And even worse so, they're still telling their members when they go to lobby that the beneficial effect is still from ingestion, when they know, and the CDC has admitted since 1999 and then 2000 that almost any effect whatsoever, any benefit is just from topical exposure. There's no benefit, no modern science shows any benefit from ingestion. And so we go back to history, and the thought process was, when this was kind of observed and the theory was put out there, was that you ingest fluoride, it gets in your bloodstream, and then you're exposing all your organs to it, but don't talk about that. But it is secreted out in your saliva all throughout the day. And so you're constantly your teeth are taking a bath in fluoride all day long. Unfortunately, the theory came before the science, and the science showed that while there is some fluoride being put out in your saliva, it's such a small amount, it actually has no impact whatsoever on the enamel. And in fact, what we found was that children are being overexposed during the development of the teeth and the development of the enamel when they're still in the gums, and when they're overexposed to fluoride from birth to about 7 years of age. And that causes hypomineralization of the teeth. This is called dental fluorosis. You might have seen maybe people in their teens or 20s or even 30s that have white and maybe some brown streaking or yellow streaking. And that's only caused by overingestion of fluoride in really mostly infancy. And it's a biomarker of overexposure. It's a visible side effect that you consume too much fluoride. And so the CDC has been tracking this for probably about 20 years now. And the numbers in the early 2000s, it was 42% of adolescents, of teens in the U.S. had dental fluorosis.
Wow.
Only caused by overconsuming fluoride. That number went up to 60% in the late 2000s. That was when the CDC, I was lobbying then. I was going to city town halls, and I was saying, listen, that the optimal level is 1.2 parts per million. This is overexposing our children. The National Research Council even said so. We need to reduce this, get it out of the water. And the American Dental Association said, nope, we're not overexposing children. Everybody is safe. We're not causing dental fluorosis. 2 years later, HHS said we need to cut the optimal level in half. This was in 2011 to 0.7. because we're overexposing children to fluoride through water. So FAN right there, we were proven right. Opponents were proven wrong. They're going to defend it up until they're forced to admit. And now the most recent data, 2 studies have come out in 2021 and 2022, looking at the CDC's most recent NHANES survey data on fluorosis. And now over 70% of our adolescents have dental fluorosis. In some counties, it's as high as 87%. Their teeth have been permanently disfigured. And it wasn't by choice. It was because their parents trusted the ADA, their parents trusted the CDC, and the politicians mandated it in their drinking water.
So this is a good. Let me jump in for just a second. All of these points are very valid. I want to give the viewers just a quick overview of the American Dental Association, because I think this is what you brought up previously was a really good point. So 63% of U.S. dentists across this country are ADA members. They pay into it. So that's a very large group of individuals. Total assets, and I pulled this as of 2022. So the ADA is about worth somewhere around $144 million as of a couple of years ago. And they spend about $3 million a year lobbying. So this is not a small group, and that's not a small amount of money that you're up against. Upon this U.S. District Court case that we're talking about, where you guys ended up beating the EPA on this, there was Judge Chen who wrote this. Given the seriousness of reduced IQ and the ample support in the record that the United States population is at risk of experiencing IQ decrements of over 4 points, the severity of the hazard at issue weighs in the favor of finding the risk unreasonable, to which your point, the ADA came right back after that, and their statement is the ADA reaffirms its stance that community water fluoridation is safe and beneficial for oral health. So, to your point.
Yeah. I mean, and to show the ridiculousness of their statement, I want to point out a couple things. First is this should be shocking to especially medical professionals. After 80 years of water fluoridation, not a single randomized controlled trial, RCT, has ever been conducted on either the safety or effectiveness of water fluoridation. So
Right.
there's no proof of safety. Let me take that another step further. As part of our trial, we were able to depose representatives who were essentially, they weren't just the individuals. They, sitting there in that deposition room, were representing the ADA and the CDC in a human form and under oath. And when we deposed them, the CDC, the FDA, the ADA, the manufacturers of these fluoridation chemicals, the American Academy of Pediatrics, we said, please show us, do you have any safety data on water fluoridation in the developing brain or safety data on fluoride in the developing brain? And not a single one of those individuals were able to provide a single piece of data or a study confirming the safety or showing that water fluoridation is safe for the developing brain. And then we get to the National Toxicology Program, which was a major part of the evidence, as part of that trial case. And so a lot of people don't realize the National Toxicology Program is who our government relies upon to assess toxicological hazards to human health. The CDC doesn't have an internal.
They're supposed to be like the independent third party that helps us with the regulation. They're advisors, right?
Correct. And to give you an example, people trust, when I go to city councils, I hear about the CDC all day long. Oh, we trust the CDC. We have communicated with the CDC over many years, and they have written back to us that they have no internal mechanism to determine safety. They just rely on scientists like the NTP to determine safety, and the ADA is just essentially a PR firm for HHS. And they just do public relations and sales, essentially, for fluoridation and for other topics. And
so it would seem that the way the government is looking at fluoride is not necessarily like a drug, but more like a supplement in the way that they regulate it, in essence, holistically speaking. So, like, for example, for a drug to come to market, has to go through a series of clinical trials, and it has to prove that it works and basically, doesn't do harm, right? In essence. And supplements, on the other hand, you can bring a supplement product to market as long as, it's been proven to not do harm. fluoride seems to be having this quasi in between, right? Where it just got approved without having efficacy in place, in essence.
Yes, it's even more muddled.
Or safety.
Yeah,
Seems
no,
like.
this is something that comes up a lot. So I'm glad this is a great question. So first, the FDA considers and regulates fluoride used as a preventative medical measure, whether it's in supplements or toothpaste or mouthwash. It's considered a drug. It's classified as drug. But because it's put into the water supply, it's not regulated by the FDA. So it's regulated by the EPA. And the EPA regulates fluoride as a contaminant in your drinking water because fluoride can be naturally occurring. In 99% of the United States, it occurs, and in most groundwater, it occurs at trace levels, like 0.1 parts per million, as opposed to the optimum.
So they classify it as a contaminant?
Yes, and that's how it's regulated. That's why it's never been. I'll go back to the other thing. It's fluoride for ingestion has never been FDA approved. It was grandfathered in, so it's never had FDA approval. Never went through the safety or efficacy studies. That's why no RCTs have been done. It was grandfathered in, so it's never been FDA approved for ingestion. Moreover, what we're doing with the water supply, this is how weird government is and how they've separated it. If you're the only way to get ingestible fluoride supplements, that's what they call them, supplements. They call it's a drug because it's prescribed. You have to get prescribed. If you live on well water with no fluoride in your water, your pediatrician will say you need fluoride supplements, but it's going to require a prescription.
Oh boy.
Meanwhile, for that water operator to put it in your drinking water, the same amount. I mean, the prescription guidelines are the same amount. We're talking about 1/4 milligram, which is about 10 ounces of fluoridated water, right? So that same amount they can put in your water, and doesn't require a prescription because it's no longer regulated by the FDA. It's regulated by the EPA because there's a little minuscule amount naturally occurring from the phosphate rock in the ground. And so that way they just regulate as a contaminant. And then how they do that is they have what's called a maximum contaminant level, MCL, the EPA sets, and that for fluoride is actually up to 4 parts per million.
Yeah.
And the National Research Council in 2006, many years ago, told them that was absurd and not safe, and they needed to lower that. And this is how government works. Here we are, 18 years later or something, they've done nothing. They've ignored the National Research Council. So, and that 4 number is just based on crippling skeletal fluorosis. So there's a lot of harms that can occur before you get so much fluoride that you're crippled. That's what happens to some people in India and China, where the levels are significantly higher. It's pure crippling, but there's a lot of side effects that occur before that. So it just is a egregious allowance that they will allow. But that's how it's regulated. To make this even more absurd, is the FDA regulates it as a drug when it's in a supplement form or in a toothpaste or something, but when it's in the water, the FDA is hands off and the EPA regulates it.
Just a little bit of, because you had mentioned the National Toxicology Program. Back in August, there was a report that was sent out, and I'm just quoting directly from, as a matter of fact, it's on the ADA website. Drinking water at more than twice the recommended limit is consistently associated with lower IQ in children. How would you regulate water intake for a child? How does a parent do that?
They can't, and that's why that's one of the major issues with water fluoridation. You can't control the dose. I mean, if I asked, and you guys are astute, you probably do understand fluoridation and fluoride. So if I asked you how much fluoride you've consumed today, you probably still couldn't tell me, even though you'd think about it. You probably have filters, because it's so pervasive. It's in so many different products, and but water is where you get 60 to 80% of your fluoride exposure. So people should also be aware of that. It's the greatest source. But no, yeah, you're right. No one knows how much fluoride they're consuming if they're drinking fluoridated tap water, and then they go and have iced tea that was produced, bottled in a fluoridated community. And even if you don't live in a fluoridated community, guess what? This still impacts you because there's a halo effect. Because if you're consuming processed foods or bottled beverages that were generated in a fluoridated community, the fluoride is in your product now. And
Oh,
you're
that's
consuming
interesting. I
it.
hadn't thought about that. Right.
Yeah.
Before
And
you
so you
came
can't
on,
control it.
yeah, before you came on, Jason and I were talking. He's like, listen, I grew up on that fluoride in the water. I drank a lot of fluoride. I could have gone to Harvard had I not been
I
drinking
could
that
have.
water.
I swear I could have.
Yeah.
But
Well,
yeah, I mean, I grew up in Concord, Massachusetts, and I know that they put fluoride in the water, and I was very athletic. So I was drinking water like a horse, quite honestly. So, I mean, obviously I got dosed up.
yeah, and plus, I go back to the NTP report for a moment, and that's just that discussion right there was just granting them that 1.5 talking point. If we go back to the NTP report, so it was actually FAN that petitioned the NTP to look into developmental neurotoxicity many years ago. They started this 8 years ago. So it was Linda Birnbaum was the director, and we petitioned them. They said they opened it up. They said, what other toxins should we be looking at? And FAN petitioned them. We made a submission. They actually did so. They actually started this systematic review. It took 8 years. And what they concluded, halfway through, they intended to publish the findings in May of 2022. And unfortunately, the American Dental Association got wind of the findings that the NTP was going to say that this was a developmental neurotoxin with moderate confidence, which is pretty much the highest rating they can give it without doing RCTs and knowingly exposing pregnant women to harm. So they gave the highest level they could give it, moderate confidence of being a developmental neurotoxin. ADA contacted CDC, and they together lobbied HHS to censor the report. And Admiral Rachel Levine, the Assistant Secretary of HHS, in May of 2022, censored the report right within days of it being published and made public. This was never going to see the light of day.
Wow.
And luckily, we're in the middle of our federal lawsuit. The judge had been waiting years. Our lawsuit paused for a few years, waiting for this NTP report. And so whistleblowers from NTP's leadership came to FAN, and they blew the whistle and said, there are things going on internally. Politics is getting involved. You need to do something. So we did FOIA requests. We found the emails verifying all of this was occurring. We found the emails verifying the report was meant to be published. It was censored, and we did the trail, finding the CDC contacting the ADA contacted the CDC and HHS. And there were even members of Congress involved. So we asked the judge, we gave this information to the judge. The judge threatened NTP with a subpoena. I will make that document available to the public, whether you like it or not. They made it available to the public, and they also made the peer reviewer comments and the NTP author comments were in response to the peer reviewer comments available to the public. That report was eventually published, and we get back to why that's the peer reviewer comments is important, but it was published, and what it found was that fluoride is a developmental neurotoxin. It found if you look at the report, I want to flip it for a second. It didn't confirm safety. The proponents of fluoridation have been telling you for 75 years, this is absolutely safe. There's no question. There was no question that it was harmful. The NTP report said, no, this is harmful. The only question is, where are most of the studies showing the harm, at what levels? So there was no affirmation of safety. And in fact, they found 72 studies, human peer-reviewed studies, that were high enough quality to meet the inclusion criteria of this review. Of those 72 studies, 64 found neurotoxicity. That's an 89% consistency across many countries, different birth cohorts, different research groups. Of the highest quality studies, which they counted 19, 18 found neurotoxicity. That's 95% consistency. That's not a red flag. That's an alarm. And so, it confirmed that our opponents have no research on safety. And yet here they are saying, you don't have enough research. You're putting in the water supply now. You're exposing 2 million pregnant women to this right now in America. You're exposing 300,000 exclusively bottle-fed infants to this right now. And yet our 64 studies showing harm isn't enough. You have 0 studies showing safety. So that's why you have to laugh at the American Dental Association and point at them and ridicule them and shame them, because that is what they deserve it at this point. But that's what the NTP report found. And when they talk about that 1.5 number on page 84, when you actually get to the summary, it says this does apply to fluoridated communities, because that 1.5 is just an approximation of exposure. They don't say, it's not a threshold. And that's how the media has been talking about it. Like, only at 1.5 is this harmful. No, they use the word approximation, even in the abstract. What they're saying is that that the levels in maternal urine of fluoride that are found in people living in communities where the level is 1.5, or those people, that proximate exposure level is where we have the highest level of confidence it's causing harm. They also have, but there are a lot of studies. In fact, the majority of those high quality 19 were under 1.5 and showed the same consistent harm. It's just that there was a greater amount of studies from China and India and Iran, where the studies have been conducted for decades, where it showed that it was harmful. But I want to point out, what is 1.5? Even if we considered that, if you drink 2 liters of water at 0.7, you're going to now reach 1.5 milligrams. If you're a pregnant woman and you follow the American Academy of Pediatrics guidelines for amount of water you're supposed to drink, which is about 96 ounces a day, let's do the math on that. You're going to be drinking, I think, close to like 3 liters of water, and you're going to be getting over 2 milligrams of fluoride. So if you follow the guidelines of the people promoting fluoridation and saying 1.5 is where the threshold is, you're going to exceed that threshold. So even their own arguments don't make sense, because they're people just reading talking points, hoping to confuse you, not really reflecting on the science.
So we don't really have any great guidelines in place in either direction, right? So is the position that of FAN no fluoridation whatsoever, like just naturally occurring? We're not, and is that the goal? Like, we want to stop this practice completely, or is there more details saying children under 10 shouldn't get it, but over the age of 10, if they get a little bit more, it's okay? Like, do we have anything along those lines?
Yeah, I mean, adding fluoride to the drinking water causes nothing but harm. So I guess I'll start there and say this harm that's occurring is self-inflicted. Unlike maybe PFOAs or arsenic in your water, or other harmful toxins that are existing there naturally and that we have to spend millions to remove. This one is self-inflicted. Our politicians are mandating the addition of it to your water and mandating it, 7-8 times higher than it's naturally occurring in your water. So step one is stop adding it. It's really easy and that would dramatically reduce exposures across the United States and across the world. We would see dramatic, like 50, 60% of exposures just dropping of your individual exposure to fluoride. And then the next step would be to look at those 3% of the communities in the United States that have high levels of naturally occurring fluoride. There's some in the Rockies. There's some in Texas is a state that has some. Here, even in New Hampshire, where I'm based, we have a few communities that have high levels of fluoride naturally occurring, but it's really expensive and difficult to remove it. And this is why it's important I'm sure you have listeners who are like, well, I'm savvy. I have a Colligan or a Brita, or I have some countertop. That doesn't work. Active charcoal does not remove fluoride.
Doesn't work.
Yep. Nope. You need reverse osmosis, which has its own problems and takes a lot of maintenance and is expensive. Or you need distillation, or you need to go out and buy spring water and then double check with that manufacturer the testing. What level, because some are low and some aren't low.
And I want to get to that because that's on your website. But the harder question I want to ask you, Stuart, is where's the money in this decision?
Yeah, right.
Because there's got to be. I don't know if you want to answer this or if you can. If you want to opt out, I understand. But certainly when you're talking about lobbying and positioning and preventing other organizations from revealing the truth, I'm trying to understand where the money is in doing that. Who's making money on fluorinating water?
Yeah.
Or hold on a minute. Or whose expenses aren't going up as a result of being able to take what is essentially a waste product and filtered through the local utilities. Because you talked about before with aluminum smelters, and I know that that's also a byproduct within agriculture too. Maybe you could talk about those two things.
Yeah, of course. Well, I'll talk about the cost in a second. The primary promoters, because I've had this discussion with lots of journalists recently, and I want to be as accurate as possible. See, we're about accuracy. And so the primary people promoting fluoridation in this moment are the American Dental Society, American Dental Association, and the American Academy of Pediatrics, and primarily the American Dental Association, who pushes American Academy of Pediatrics. And at this point, there is a financial benefit to them, and I'll get to that. But we feel like most of what you're seeing is they do not want to lose public trust. They've promoted this for 50 years. This is really tied to them uniquely. And they've not only ridiculed opponents, but they've assured the public for decades with absolute statements that this is safe. So this would be destroy their credibility. It would, no one would lose public trust. It would hurt the CDCs, and the CDC's thinking, well, what about our other public health programs? They could fall prey to this fluoridation one since it affects 70% of the public. They'll all get wind of this, and so there's a credibility loss, and that's why even more so than the money at this point. I think that's what they're scattering and panicking about. Fluoridation's over. It's going to take time, but it's going to be done. And now they're trying to figure out how they can squirm out of it by patting. Yeah.
Is there also possible litigation afterwards?
Yes. There is. Yeah. There is, but not. I don't. There is, and that's
it's more the legitimacy of the authority. Because the federal government, the states, the local communities, they have all been endorsing this for decades. As Jason said, going back to 1945, this would be a tremendous blow if they turn around and say, not only are there not safety studies, this stuff isn't safe, but it's actually dangerous. That's huge.
Yeah, I mean, a good example, and I'll get to the cause, the money aspect. I'm happy to talk about it. But when the NTP came out with their draft prior to 2022, they did a press conference, and not many of the media actually picked it up at that time because it was just a draft. But a member of the National Cranial Research Association, essentially the dental wing of NIH, stood up, and instead of really questioning the science, they said, well, you should water down the language a little bit, because then if the public sees that this is a neurotoxin, they will lose public trust in the water supply, in the public water supply. Wow. So that's their concern is, and we've heard this along the way, you need to change the language. You need to temper the language. I've been sat through so many government hearings where they say this. That's all they're concerned about is the massaging the PR, because it's a lie that's too big to fail.
It's fallout.
And when they lowered the optimal level, because of the dental fluorosis rates, if you looked at the CDC said, yeah, we're overexposing people. The ADA didn't. They said, oh my God, we did such a good job giving you guys fluoride toothpaste. We're the best.
And doubling down.
In our infinite wisdom, we're realizing that some people are getting too much. So we're the ones driving the lowering of the level because we've done such a good job of getting you fluoride. Bullshit. Sorry for the language, but that was how they spun it. But you get to the money, we talked about there is money. So with the ADA, you talked about, I didn't give you that information. You were able to find it yourself. They're one of the most powerful lobbies, period, in the United States. They brag about how their office building is as close to the Senate as anybody, even more than Anheuser-Busch or NRA or anyone else. They're the closest. They don't have to walk very far. That's the point of pride in Washington, D.C., I guess. So they make I'll spin it this way. If the Fluoride Action Network made money off of selling water filters, or we sold things that helped you get rid of fluoride, that would be a conflict of interest. Or we promoted companies that did that. We don't. We just rely completely on individual donors to exist. We'd have no conflicts of interest in that regard. The American Dental Society, they make millions of dollars annually in grants, as well as just off their labeling, the endorsements from dental product manufacturers whose number one active ingredient in most of their products is fluoride. And so that's it. And you might say, FAN isn't going after fluoride toothpaste. We're going after fluoridation and the ingestion of fluoride. But let's be honest, a lot of fluoride is made from the same phosphate fertilizer waste, just refined a little bit further than as your fluoridation additives are made from. And when the federal ruling occurred, I was getting text messages from friends and family who had listened to me talk about this for a decade, but were finally like, "Oh my God, you were right."
Yeah.
By the way, I also threw out all of my fluoride toothpaste, and this was a ruling on fluoride.
Feel your pain, Stuart.
So Stuart's the crazy uncle. I'm the crazy uncle too. Oh, good.
Yeah, we're all the
boat.
crazy ones here.
So we're all crazy until we win, right? And
Unconventional.
that's why
Absolutely.
Unconventional.
But that's what they're afraid of,
here.
this chilling effect. And I had, prior to joining FAN, I had lobbied for public health organizations and nonprofits and big corporations. And I can tell you that the bigger the corporations are, the more they try to control any mention of anything within their economic sphere. So if you're like a beer company, even if some other beer company is getting attacked, you go after the people attacking them, because there can be no chilling effect, because it all affects sales. Yep.
Well, I can tell you, so I grew up with fluoride. Jason grew up with fluoride. To your point earlier, when we're talking about the most vulnerable in the community, right? That's a sort of an easy play after this ruling, especially. So you had the, not the Attorney General, the Surgeon General of Florida, who recently came out right after this and said, you know what, we're going to recommend that fluoridation, fluoride be taken out of the drinking water at the very least, because we're talking about kids, nursing children, nursing and pregnant women. They shouldn't be taking this stuff in for the obvious reasons, right? So.
Yeah, no, Dr. Ladapo, he's the first state Surgeon General to come out and call for an end to water fluoridation. And he was accompanied by Dr. Ashley Mallon, and a dentist. So a lot of the media isn't reporting that. They're just kind of going after him because he's become a political figure in a way. But they're ignoring the fact that he had a dentist with him, a veteran dentist, and one of the lead authors of one of those NIH-funded studies. And that was published. It was Mallon 2024, published in May, and that was funded by NIH, National Institutes of Health, our government, and EPA. And it looked at pregnant women living in optimally fluoridated Los Angeles, and whether or not those who had the higher fluoride levels in that community had any neurobehavioral problems in their children. And what it found was that those pregnant women who had higher levels, those levels found in that fluoridated community, had their children had a doubling chance, or double the chance of 9 different neurobehavioral problems. Wow. And so she was there, and so he's the first. He's not alone. We've learned that there are now, a FOIA request from one of the dental society's emails showed that another state toxicologist has also told them internally he opposes water fluoridation. We also have in Nebraska, a Dr. Khan, who was a former Surgeon General, Deputy Surgeon General of the United States, put out a tweet saying, the federal judge's ruling is very reasonable and shouldn't have taken a judge. It should have been done by the regulators. And I'm getting calls every day from state legislators. We're going to see legislation in a number of states to either prohibit fluoridation or to reverse mandates. And state mandates, there's 12 states that mandate it at the state level. And over 20 communities have ended it in just recent weeks due to the federal ruling, with over 57 now debating it in the coming weeks, potentially end it.
How hard or difficult is it for a state to decide we're not going to do this anymore at this point? How long would it take?
It would just take a legislative session. So a legislative session is, a lot of them are starting now in January. Bills are being put in now. Right. And I urge any legislators listening to this, or citizens who have contacts with legislators, urge them to put in a bill, because a lot are. Put in a bill now, and by June that could become law. But a lot of legislators are still letting municipal leaders decide this, because that's where it historically has been decided. At the local level. And that's going to take time, because there's thousands of communities that do this individually. So I think that what we're going to see is we're going to continue to see a wave of communities locally end it. We're already seeing it. It's going to continue. It's growing. and Fan is educating other peers of Dr. Ladapo in other states, as well as state legislators, and we're going to start to see some bills. They're going to do well, I think, and generate momentum. You look at any health policy, you start with 4 or 5 states, some of them pass them, and you get that ball rolling. It takes time. And I remember, I've lived through that in the legislatures here with BPA in infant bottles and PFOAs and MTBE in gasoline. These are toxins that the federal government said they were going to do something about eventually, but states got ahead of. But I do want to point out that our federal ruling, because I know we're probably limited on time, we won the federal ruling, and that took 7 years. And that ruling determined that optimally fluoridated water poses an unreasonable risk to human health, and particularly to the developing brain and IQ. It wasn't fluoride in general. It was optimally fluoridated water at 0.7. And so that judge told the EPA that now this is considered a hazard under the Toxic Controlled Substances Act, and now you need to regulate it. The review is over. There's no more reviewing. You have to promulgate rules under TSCA, and TSCA gives them very few options on how they can what rules they can promulgate that must eliminate this risk. And so those rules really kind of, on one side is you pass a warning, but you imagine on the face of that, I don't think they're going to do that. How stupid, if you're a pregnant woman and you have a child, don't drink the tap water, right?
Yeah,
that's so the only other thing is to commercially eliminate or prohibit the commercial distribution and sale of these additives, because they kind of regulate the commercial aspect of it. And so that's it. But this could take time. It could take 2 or 3 years for them to do that.
But that makes sense. And I think we should come back to this. And if somebody is viewing this and they're like, we really want, at least in my community, we want to move quicker than whatever the state is going to end up doing. We're going to have to come back to what action steps do they take? But I do want people to understand with the EPA, I mean, there are over 80,000 commercially available chemicals out there. And the EPA is in charge of safety and regulation of these things. And over the past 30 years, just to keep this in mind, only 570 have actually been analyzed. And back in 2018, for instance, they didn't look at any of them. So it really does take organizations, nonprofits and people, getting involved to push the ball forward. But to your point, all right, so I'm in my local community. I find out that I've got fluoride being dropped into the water. I don't want to wait for the state of New Hampshire to do something, or whatever state you live in. What do I do? What's my action plan?
Well, first I would say visit Fluoride Alert, fluoridealert.org. If you type in fluoridealert.com, it'll take you to the American Dental Association. They're tricky like that.
Oh, for heaven's sakes.
But yeah. And then we have a take action section. But first confirm that you have fluoride in your water. You can do that by calling your water operator. You can go to Google, type in the name of your town, plus the words water quality report. Annually, they have to put out a water quality report, and it'll tell you your fluoride level. Optimally fluoridated is what they call it. It'll be about 0.7 parts per million. If your water is fluoridated, then I would say go to our website, take those action materials, and start by just talking to your city councilor. I think that's better to do it call them, email them, talk to them, meet them in person is even better. So I would say meeting them in person, going to their meeting after and talking to them afterwards, followed by a phone call. That's better than an email, but just educating them about this and saying, look at this federal ruling that occurred. We need to act on this now. Sometimes that's enough just to educate them. A lot of these city councils haven't thought about this in 50 years, and they're so busy with other subjects that they need you to bring it to their attention. And that's what we're seeing in most of these communities. If you feel like your community is larger, it might make sense to find 3 or 4 other people who agree with you, and kind of start a little campaign. That way, because what will happen, and this is why, and come to FAN, and we have a take action section where you can contact us and we can provide extra assistance to some extent. But because there's a lot of people asking for assistance right now. So I wish I could give you more, but we'll do our best. But what will happen is if you're in a small community, you might just have to talk to, Jim, the city councilor, and that'll be enough, or your water operator. and let them know. That's another person. Let your water operator know. Many of them are concerned about safety. They take it personally, and they will then go to the city council. But if you live in a larger community, what can happen is you go down to City Hall, you start that debate, the city council considers it, they're going to look at it and discuss it at a hearing. American Dental Association shows up, a group called the American Fluoridation Society will show up, and they'll just lie to your city councilors about, if you swallow this, it's the greatest thing since sliced bread, and you can ignore this federal ruling, and so you need to prepare for some sort of debate. And that's why it might help to have 3 or 4 other people in your community to join you there. But I would start there.
You sound like you're talking from a position of expertise here. This has clearly happened before, where they show up.
Oh, it blows people's minds because I hear this all the time. What I hear all the time is I talked to a dentist not too long ago. He'd been practicing dentistry for 30 years. Called me and said, "Oh my God, I did the research I never done. I feel terrible, and now I'm going to make amends by leading an effort in my community to remove this." And nice. I said, "Great." And he said, "I've read the material. This is going to be so easy. I'm just going to go down there and talk about the infant exposure, neurotoxicity, dental fluorosis. It's going to be so easy. How could they not see it?" He went down there and he was blown away. I thought that originally too. I thought this has no benefit to a bottle-fed infant. They don't have teeth. It's only causing harm. How could anyone support this? But everybody, the American Dental Society shows up, Fluoridation Society, they'll get letters from the state oral health director. They'll get letters from deans of local dental schools, the 2 or 3 dentists in the state that are on the state dental society legislative committee, but they don't tell you that. Yeah. They'll send emails, and all of them are just the same cut and paste talking points from the CDC. That's what I tell you. It's not nefarious. They just trust the people above them and will just cut and paste the same talking points.
Yeah, that's a great point. There's a lot of blind trust there. But I'll tell you what, if this ends up becoming a tidal wave, they can't go out and lobby every single community. It'll be overwhelming for them. So I'm hoping that people take this to heart, and this becomes like a real movement come 2025 for sure. And I just want to share with you just real quick. I've had the last 2 dentists. They are relatively alternative in their approach to dentistry, and they both said to me, their office promotes fluoride treatment. And then I brought them aside and I said, "Look, I'm going to share some information with you." And they tell me to a T, they're like, "We know this. I don't recommend you do anything with fluoride, especially if you have kids." So they are telling me this. It's not the people in the office. It's once you get the dentist aside and he's outside the hearing range of other people, they will be pretty candid with you. But what does the ADA have that much power and influence over these guys?
Yeah, they absolutely do. I'll point out there are dental organizations that do support our work and are opposed to water fluoridation, like the International Academy of Medicine and Toxicology, IAOMT. And their dentists, people should look up their dentists. They're mercury and fluoride free dentistry. But yeah, the American Dental Association, we've worked with dentists who are still practicing dentists. And if you come out and make a statement against water fluoridation, all of a sudden after 20, 30 years of dentistry, your regulatory board is wanting to investigate you. Maybe you didn't do enough notes. Maybe you didn't file enough papers. Maybe you had a patient that all of a sudden has a claim on some Google website about you. This happens repeatedly. We had a dentist in Calgary campaign where we put out a mailer to everyone, and he was so concerned, he just said, "I'll just put in a statement simply saying most of the benefit from fluoride is topical, and you can achieve it through topical products." That was his statement. And he was threatened almost immediately after that mailing went out and told that if you want an investigation, we'll investigate you. You got to keep your mouth shut. We've heard this repeatedly from dentists that, we've had doctors who have supported us. We have a doctor right now also in Calgary who is undergoing, he's in a legal fight to maintain his license because they said you spoke out against fluoridation and our medical association supports it. And so you're not allowed to say anything against fluoridation. So that's what happens. And there's a long, long history of them doing that. They threaten. I'll use one last example is State College Water Authority in State College, Pennsylvania is unique because It's where Penn State is located, home of 70,000 people. And they studied the issue of fluoridation for a year. They unanimously voted to end fluoridation after that study to the neurotoxicity and the fluorosis. And because their chemical was coming from China, where 99% of the dry additive comes from, hey, you're getting your phosphate fertilizer waste from China added to your water. And it was contaminated. And the whole board is made up of PhDs from the university and engineers, water experts, engineers. And after they ended it, they were attacked and ridiculed by the American Dental Association. And one of the members, who was a professor, said that even her own department was getting contacted by some of these pro-fluoridation people saying, like, you are allowing a member of your academic department to look at this. They're embarrassing you. They're anti-science. They're up. So we've seen this happen multiple times. And even some of the authors of these studies that were pro-fluoridation, they did an NIH-funded study. They underwent the most rigorous. It was published in JAMA Pediatrics under the most rigorous scrutiny, as even the editor of JAMA said, more scrutiny than any other study they'd ever published. And even they were attacked, and their department chairs were contacted saying, you need to fire this person because they're embarrassing your department and they're anti-science. And in all these scenarios, the departments defended these academics, saying we believe in academic freedom. But that shows you to the extent to which the opponents or the proponents of water fluoridation are willing to go to. And we have deposition video, which we haven't released yet, but we will, showing that there are some of these dental organizations, the State and Territorial Dental Directors Association, that produce letters claiming that these scientists who produce these neurotoxicity studies committed scientific fraud. Their document was ghostwritten by a dentist, and who was just riddled with lies. And they all signed it. They admitted they signed it without confirming any of those lies. It led to one of the authors having their labs swatted, essentially shut down for an investigation. Wow. She thought her career was going to be over. That she was validated, and we have a deposition video showing that they never even fact checked the documents. They just accused these scientists of scientific fraud, when in fact they're the proponents who are committing scientific fraud. So right. Yes, they will attack and stifle debate as much as possible.
Okay, so that's a lot. That's a lot to digest. So for people who are, watching the podcast and for the first time, they probably didn't even think that fluoride being added to the water was dangerous at all. Now they get a full scope of the science behind it, and also one of the main reasons why they haven't heard of it before, because these scare tactics, a lot of them, they work. And I know that they've worked with a couple of the dentists that I've, been receiving services from. So in conclusion here, is there any rock that we have not turned over? Is there anything that you want to leave with folks before? And a lot of the things that we had talked about, the studies, the contact information and all of that, we're going to leave in the notes so people can get to Fan. And I will say, I should probably cover myself here and say, if there's anybody from the ADA or the EPA that wants to reach out to us and come on the show, we're more than willing to have you on, and we can discuss these topics, no problem. But Stuart, you have the last word.
Yeah, I mean, I would say that, even the ADA and the American Academy of Pediatrics' own clinical guidelines for fluoride supplementation, there's prescribed supplements in the clinical setting, suggest you do not give any fluoride to a child of 6 months age or younger, an infant. We have deposition video from the CDC saying there's no benefit whatsoever to the infant or to the fetus. And so for a dentist to come in and say this is beneficial, when in fact it produces only risk for the fetus and for a bottle-fed infant, and significant risk of 5 to 7 points of IQ loss, increased risks of ADHD, it'd be absurd for them to continue to defend this practice. So I would say a cavity can easily be filled, but damage to the brain is permanent and has life-altering significance. You don't get second chances with the brain. And the public definitely didn't sign up to have a neurotoxin added to their drinking water.
That's a great end. Stuart Cooper, Fluoride Action Network, thank you so much for being on. Folks, if you enjoyed this episode, please like and subscribe, and we'll catch you on the next one.